He squinted toward the bushes near the dried-up creek. A faint sound, then a tall figure burst out and stumbled to the ground. Reed immediately raised his rifle and walked forward cautiously. It was an Apache woman. Her body was covered in dust and dried blood, veins bulging in her arms. Her face sunburned, but her dark eyes still burning with fire. She was gasping for air, her voice raspy from thirst as she raised both hands. "Do not shoot. I can bear you, children. Just let me live." On her other arm, Reed could see a bruised fracture, the blood already dried. Her legs were scraped and bleeding, but she held her back straight. Reed stood still, rifle barrel, unmoving. A flash of his late wife crossed his mind those days when she lay in bed, just as broken. Finally, Reed lowered his rifle, unhooked the canteen from his belt, and tossed it to the ground in front of her. "Drink it, then come with me." Takina said nothing. She picked up the water and drank it all, then nodded. Reed turned and walked back toward the ranch, knowing full well that his solitary life had just changed. Behind him, the sound of Takina's footsteps, uneven but steady, matched the rhythm of his heart, which was now beating harder with every step. Takina lay in the corner of the horse stable, her back against the wooden wall, eyes wide open in the darkness. Her hand clutched a small knife tightly, like a wild animal ready to strike if cornered. From the porch, Reed watched her. His shadow stretched long across the dirt. He still was not used to having someone else on his land, especially an Apache woman, someone the town saw as an enemy. By the next morning, when Reed stepped out into the yard, Takina had already been awake for a while. She was drawing water from the well, washing her face, then quietly cleaning the stable, no orders given, no one watching over her. By midday, a young calf broke loose near the damaged fence. Reed had just grabbed the rope when Takina rushed ahead of him. Though she still limped, she quickly herded the calf back into the pen, her movements fast and precise. When the gate was finally shut, she stood there catching her breath, her face covered in sweat and dust, but her eyes still burned with determination. Reed stood watching for a long moment. He said nothing, just gave a small nod, then turned back to his post, hammering in wooden stakes. As the sun began to set, Takina built a small fire outside the stable and roasted some dried meat she had brought with her. Reed came out with a tin mug of warm milk, setting it down beside the fire without a word. Takina looked at him, her gaze no longer as guarded. That night, as Reed stood on the porch, he heard the wind sweeping across the fields, and the faint sound of wood clinking from the stable as Takina secured the door. He realized this ranch, once filled with nothing but silence, now had a second breath, strong and defiant. But somehow, it made the place feel less empty. That evening, the summer wind picked up, dragging dark clouds across the sky. Reed was stacking firewood when he heard a faint cough from the horse stable. He walked over and found Takina sitting with her knees drawn up, her forehead damp with sweat, her shoulders trembling slightly. "You have a fever," Reed said in a low voice. Takina looked up, her eyes wary out of instinct. But she did not push his hand away as he knelt to examine the wound. The cut on her calf was red and swollen, with pus seeping out. Reed stood and brought back a basin of hot water, a knife heated until red, and a clean piece of cloth. Takina clenched her teeth as he carefully lanced the infection, cleaned the wound, and bandaged it. Sweat rolled down her cheek, but she did not make a sound. When he finished, Reed placed a thick blanket beside her. "Get some rest. It is going to rain tonight." Night fell for real. Rain pattered on the tin roof. Reed sat by the fire inside the cabin, listening to distant thunder. Suddenly, he saw Takina's figure at the door, her clothes soaked and clinging to her, arms holding the blanket. "Come in," Reed said, tossing another log onto the fire. Takina sat by the hearth, her broad hands stretched toward the warmth. The firelight cast shadows across her sun-worn face, making the small scar on her cheekbone stand out. After a long silence, she spoke in a hoarse voice. "I was captured with my younger sister. They tied us to a post and marched us for weeks. My sister did not survive. They hurt her. I cut myself free and ran all night to escape. Since then, I have not slept peacefully." Reed stared into the flames. "I lost my wife and son to fever. This house used to be full of laughter. Now it is only the wind." The two sat quietly. No comfort, no promises, just the fire burning between two souls who had been left behind. Outside, the rain poured down, washing the dust from the earth. Inside the cabin, the silence was no longer cold, it felt like shelter. When Takina stood to return to the stable, she left the old blanket on the chair and wrapped herself in the new one Reed had given her. He watched her go, sensing that the invisible distance between them had just grown a little smaller. The next morning, the clouds still hung heavy over the hilltops. Reed headed toward the northern fence to check, but stopped in his tracks. On the damp ground were clear trails of fresh hoofprints. 1, then 2, then 3, lined up and pointing straight toward the ranch before curving away. Reed knelt down, touched the damp soil. These were not from any of his cattle, and definitely not from horses belonging to anyone local. He knew every horse in Cinderbrush like the back of his hand. Back in the yard, he saw Takina carrying a bucket of water. "What happened?" she asked, seeing the grim look on his face. "Someone came close to the fence last night," Reed answered tersely, loading his Winchester. Takina set the bucket down, her eyes darkening. "They might come back. Those men do not give up easily." Reed stood silent, rifle in hand. He knew the safest choice was to send her away to bring peace back to his land. But as he looked at Takina standing upright, one leg still stiff with pain, eyes unshaken, something tightened in his chest. "You can leave now," he said slowly. "If you move fast, they may not catch your trail." Takina said nothing. She simply bent down, picked up the old knife from the wooden crate, checked the blade, and slid it back into its sheath. "I have been running long enough," she said softly. "If they want to come, I will be waiting." Reed looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Then we get ready." All afternoon, the two worked without pause. Reed boarded up the windows with wooden planks and reinforced the doors. Takina moved the dry straw away from the cabin to prevent fire, gathering wood and stacking it into piles. As night fell, Reed pulled a chair out onto the porch, rifle resting across his lap. Takina sat by the stable door, the tip of her spear grounded in the dirt. No words were spoken, but the silence between them was no longer distant. It felt like the shared understanding of two warriors before a battle. A gust of wind passed by, carrying the scent of scorched grass from somewhere far off. Reed tightened his grip on the rifle stock. He knew that from this moment on, if anyone dared step onto this land, they would not leave without blood being spilled. "I truly appreciate having you here. And if this story brought back old memories of dusty afternoons and the sound of hooves echoing deep in your chest, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, so that every day we can sit together again. And I will tell you one more story from the West." The next morning, the sun blazed red, casting a heat that felt like it could scorch the earth. Reed carried a box of nails out to the field, and Takina followed behind with a bucket of water. They worked nearly the entire day without a break, driving in new wooden posts, stretching out fresh barbed wire. Reed was used to working alone, but today, he barely had to say a word. Takina swung the hammer with steady strength, each strike ringing out in rhythm. Sweat ran down her back, glistening against her bronze skin. Reed glanced over. This woman worked like a man, but there was something fierce and upright in her that made it hard to look away. Around midday, while pulling a stretch of wire, it suddenly snapped back and whipped across the back of Reed's hand, drawing blood. He winced slightly, but before he could tend to it, Takina stepped forward and grabbed his hand. "Let me see," she said, her voice low but firm. Reed sat on a wooden post and let her wrap the wound with a clean strip of cloth. Her movements were slow, steady, her broad hand surprisingly gentle. When he looked up, their eyes met. The afternoon sun cast its light through, reflecting deep within her dark eyes. "Thank you," Reed said quietly. Takina said nothing, just let go of his hand, then stood and went back to work. By late afternoon, they were herding the cattle back into the pen. Red dust swirled under the setting sun, their shadows stretching long across the ground. When the herd had settled, Reed leaned against a post, breathing hard, his shirt soaked with sweat. Takina sat on the porch steps, breathing heavily too, her face smudged with dust but her eyes still burning bright. That night, they sat in front of the fire inside the cabin. No words, just the sound of wood crackling in the flames. Reed poured a cup of coffee and handed it to her. Takina took it, drank a small sip, then set it down. The moment hung between them, taut as a drawn bowstring. Reed leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on her face. Takina slowly leaned forward. The kiss came naturally, not rushed, not forced like an unspoken truth that they had found each other in this harsh land. When they parted, Reed simply nodded, then stood to add another log to the fire. Takina turned away, but the corner of her mouth lifted the first smile she had shown since the day she arrived. That night, for the first time, Reed slept deeply. The wind no longer sounded like morning. The following afternoon, the sky was eerily overcast. Reed was inspecting the cattle pen when he heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. He squinted toward the fence. 3 riders were approaching, red dust swirling behind them. Reed set the bucket down and walked straight onto the porch. He took the Winchester from its place on the wall, loading it slowly but with steady hands. Takina emerged from the stable, spear in hand, her dark eyes narrowing in warning. The 3 men on horseback stopped at the gate. The one in front spat on the ground, his crooked smile full of menace. "We heard there's an Apache hiding out around here. Hand her over, and you won't have any trouble." Reed stood tall, his shadow filling the doorway. The rifle rested in his hands, barrel pointed down but ready to lift in an instant. "There's no one here but me," Reed said slowly. The man sneered, glancing toward Takina, who stood half hidden by the porch. "Then what's that?" Takina stepped fully into view, standing right beside Reed. Her shoulders were bare, old scars etched clearly beneath the dust. She did not lower her spear. Her gaze locked onto the men, unwavering. "She stays," Reed said, his voice like steel. "This is my land." The air grew thick with tension. One of the riders reached for his revolver, but the leader held up a hand. He squinted at Reed, then spat again. "We'll be back, and when we come back, you'll regret choosing her." With that, all 3 turned their horses and galloped off, a cloud of red dust rising in their wake. Reed lowered his rifle, breathing slowly. Takina did not move, her grip on the spear so tight her knuckles turned white. "They will not stop," she said. Reed nodded. "Then neither will we." That afternoon, the ranch became a fortress. They added extra latches to the doors and reinforced the windows with wooden planks. Takina dug trenches around the stable to guard against fire attacks, while Reed stacked sandbags to block the entryway. As night fell, they sat by the fire, the golden light casting sharp shadows across their tense faces. Takina sharpened her spear with slow, steady strokes, while Reed cleaned the rifle, each movement careful, almost ceremonial. Outside, the prairie was silent, but heavy with threat. They both knew tomorrow night would not be quiet, and they were ready. The next night, heavy rain fell. The downpour pounded against the tin roof, sweeping the scent of wet earth into the cabin. Reed sat inside, rifle laid across the table, waiting like a wolf guarding its territory. Suddenly, the barn door creaked open in the wind. Reed jumped to his feet, grabbing the lantern and his gun. The yellow glow swept across the yard, revealing Takina. She wore a soaked blanket over her shoulders, a cloth bag on her back, walking quickly toward the fence. "Takina," Reed shouted, his voice cutting through the rain. She froze, her shoulders tense. "I cannot let you lose everything because of me. If I leave, they will not hurt you." Reed stepped forward, rain pouring down his face. "You think I would just let you disappear like that?" Takina turned, eyes flaring with anger. "You do not owe me anything. I am the one who brought trouble here." Reed walked fully into the muddy yard, rifle in hand, though the barrel pointed down. Rain lashed across his shoulders, ice cold. "Listen to me, Takina," he said through clenched teeth. "I have already lost my wife and son, lost every reason to hold on to this land. If you leave, I will have one more regret to carry." She clutched the strap of her bag, chest rising and falling. Reed shouted, voice breaking, "I would rather lose this entire ranch than lose you." His words struck like thunder through the storm. Takina stood still, her dark eyes glowing in the night. The bag slipped from her hand and fell with a soft thud into the mud. Slowly, she stepped toward Reed. Rain soaked her hair, streaming down her cheeks like tears. "Are you not afraid of the price you might pay for this choice?" Reed lowered the rifle and gripped her shoulders. "No, because I am not alone anymore." The silence that followed was filled only by the roar of the rain. Takina let the blanket fall from her shoulders, standing tall like a warrior before battle. Together, they walked back to the cabin. Reed threw more wood onto the fire, and the flames flared up bright and strong. Takina sat down on the floor, back against the wall, eyes following Reed as he cleaned his rifle. For the first time, They were not just two souls taking shelter under the same roof. They were allies, ready to face the morning together, whether it brought blood or freedom. At sunrise the next morning, the sky burned red, as if warning of a violent day ahead. Reed had been up early, standing on the porch with his Winchester fully loaded. Takina tied her hair back tight, her spear propped up by the door. Neither spoke, but both knew today would bring everything to an end. The sound of hooves echoed in the distance, first faint, then louder, until red dust clouded the front gate. 5 riders appeared, revolvers hanging at their sides. The leader curled his lip in a smirk. "One last chance, old man. Hand her over and keep your life." Reed did not move. He raised the Winchester, the barrel catching the morning light. "You set foot past that fence, and none of you leave whole." A deadly silence fell. Takina stepped off the porch, her bare shoulders damp with sweat, standing beside Reed like a bronze statue. The leader spat into the dirt. "Then shoot, if you've got the guts." A rifle cracked loud and sharp. The bullet struck the wooden post just inches from his horse's hooves. The animal reared, screaming. The men cursed, drew their guns, and fired back. Reed and Takina dropped behind the sandbags, returning fire with precision. Within minutes, the dust flared up again, this time as the riders turned tail, fleeing while firing wildly behind them. When the sound of hooves faded into the distance, Reed lowered his rifle, shoulders tense. Silence returned to the ranch. Only the scent of gunpowder and the pounding of their hearts remained. Takina stepped onto the porch, her eyes sweeping the field before landing on Reed. They both exhaled, as if a great weight had finally been lifted. "It's over," Reed said. Takina nodded, the corners of her lips curling into the first true smile. That afternoon, they worked together to rebuild the broken fence, driving in new posts. When the work was done, Reed leaned against a post, watching the golden sunlight spill across the prairie. Takina came beside him, her wide hand reaching for his calloused one. "This ranch," she said softly. "It's mine now, too." Reed nodded. "And you are not going anywhere." As dusk settled, they sat together on the porch steps. The glow from the fire inside lit the yard with a warm light, casting the shadows of 2 figures sitting close in peace and quiet. For the first time in years, Reed felt this land was no longer just something he protected, it had become a home. Dear friends, true love does not come from pretty promises, it comes from muddy hands that still hold tight through the storm. It is when 2 broken hearts dare to trust again, dare to stand side by side in the face of danger. In the harsh West, a love like that does not just save a life, it saves a soul, turning wild earth into a place to begin again. It has been a joy riding alongside you, my dear audience of Wild West storytelling. I wish you happiness and peace, wherever you are. I love you all. Tell me what you felt about this story. Leave a comment down below. Press 1 if you liked the story. And do not forget to subscribe channel to catch the next dramatic tale from the Wild West.